I start the presentation by just listing lots of problems.
Yes.
And, it's inequality, it's homelessness, it's obesity, it's addiction, lots and lots and lots. And I say, all of these things seem like disparate issues. They seem like they're totally unconnected, and we experience them all around us today, but they're also getting worse. Very few people think we're traveling in the right direction here as a country, as a society, or further. But I say, look, all of these share a root cause, and it's just the quality of the money. Make up your own mind. Because, Jeremy, people often say, Bitcoin's like a cult. But it's the only cult in the world where you're told, don't trust anybody else. Think for yourself and make your own decisions. Yeah, I guess it's that sort of cult. And it's
free critical thinking.
Critical thinkers welcome.
Joe Bryan is a former investment bank derivatives trader turned sports betting entrepreneur who, during lockdown, went down the proverbial Bitcoin rabbit hole. Having exited from the company that bought his sports odds business last year, a friend invited Joe on a weekend away. Each guest had to prepare a short talk to lead a discussion on a topic of their choice. Joe chose Bitcoin. It was his passion and his specialist subject. However, it's a big subject and he didn't know where to start. So, assuming no prior knowledge, he told a story explaining why Bitcoin exists and what it fixes. He called his presentation, "What's the Problem?" And Bitcoin was deliberately not mentioned until the very last slide. The success of his pitch encouraged him to make a video. And earlier this year, Joe launched What's the Problem on YouTube and X. The 40-minute film tells the story of two identical countries with perfect economies and perfect money, save for the existence of a big red button, only for use in case of emergency in the country run by Fiatello. For the avoidance of doubt, the big red button equates to a central bank and today's modern monetary policy. In so doing, Joe explains the wide range of common societal problems that stem from fiat money. These include loss of trust, obesity, family breakdowns, addiction, wealth inequality, and of course, inflation. Joe leads his audience to the door of the Bitcoin rabbit hole. He wants to spread the word because, as he sees it, Bitcoin is inevitable. Everyone will find it at their own time, but eventually everyone will get drawn in and they will own it at their own price. Joe is what might be called a Bitcoin maximalist, who points to the launch of Bitcoin ETFs and the US Strategic Bitcoin Reserve as evidence that there is no stopping this train. Of course, he could be wrong, and as always, what you're about to hear is not investment or any other type of advice. It is for your critical evaluation and is only for your information and entertainment. Always do your own research and take professional advice tailored to your own requirements before investing a penny of your money in these crazy markets. And with that, please enjoy my conversation with the Maverick, Joe Bryan.
Brought to you by Progressive Equity.
Joe, thanks so much for joining us today. Can we just start with you giving us a little bit of background on you?
My name's Joe Bryan. Well, I'm from the north of England. Went to Oxford to do physics. Then went from Oxford straight to Goldman Sachs. Spent 10 years as an equity derivatives trader. 5 years at Goldman and then 5 years across Morgan Stanley and UBS. Through the 2008 financial crisis and all that stressful period, started modelling sports from a mathematical perspective, mainly football. I've always loved maths and sports. And so the combination of the two is the ideal sweet spot. I wanted to be a bookmaker when I was younger. Initially, I was modelling the football mathematically just as a bit of fun. If you do something you enjoy, quite often that can lead to something that is valuable. This is a repeated sort of process, I guess, in my history. But I started modelling that, realised that I could actually do this reasonably well and better than a lot of the bookmakers at the time for certain sports, certain things. So then left the city, started a quant engineering business where we would do the modelling of the sports, write algorithms, bolt them onto real-time engineering and then create automated trading systems. And then we turned that into a B2B business. So we started supplying bookmakers with better prices and new product for their customers. And then we were acquired after a couple of years. And then I spent from 2018 to 12 months ago helping scale that acquiring business into a global business today. And then the business scaled to a point where it's just so much bigger than when it started. And I love solving problems, moving quickly and spinning lots of plates at the same time. And it wasn't a small business anymore. My ability to, meaningfully influence it had changed just through the size and the nature of the business. And also I found Bitcoin over that period in 2020. And so, I spent 4 years going further and further down the rabbit hole. And once you get to a certain point, it just becomes clear there's just nothing else more important than working on Bitcoin. It's just going to change the entire world. And most people don't realize.
I've heard you talk about this on other podcasts. You talk in terms of inevitability and certainty. And from your background of being a physicist and then being an options trader and an entrepreneur, I would have thought there's something along that journey would have indicated to you that there is nothing in life that is certain, that we all live in a unknown, unknowable, risky world, which you have benefited from because of your ability to think probabilistically and this inevitability about this opportunity in Bitcoin that I think it seems to be slightly inconsistent with your journey to this point.
Yeah. When I say, in my view, Bitcoin is inevitable, it's because it is the first system which is effectively indestructible and it removes the power of the state to such a degree and aligns the incentives of every member of the population and every level of society to engage with it. And it's an anti-fragile system. You cannot defeat a system where it encourages everyone to work in their own self-interest to the benefit of everybody else. You can't defeat something like that. How do you defeat something like that? You can't.
Since 2020, you found the rabbit hole and went down the rabbit hole. What was it that lured you to the rabbit hole?
Initially, I was spending time. Obviously, we all had a lot more time on our hands. During that period, for the first time, you're sort of jolted out of your just monotonous everyday routine and where you have very little time and you get to take a step back. Your whole situation changes. You're stuck at home or you're going for a walk. And for me personally, I ended up spending a lot of time listening to Real Vision, which I don't know if you've come across.
Yeah.
And Real Vision now is very different from Real Vision.
Yes.
Back then it was focused on global macro. And I was listening to it from a TradFi perspective. So understanding the world more broadly and the opportunities, et cetera, et cetera. And then Raoul Pal started to think about Bitcoin. And he was going through that journey at a similar time. I'd come across it a couple of times before, but that was the right setting to hear it from somebody who's already credible, who's already thinking in a very similar way, to then open up the door to this new thing. And then to be asking the right questions, going through the right evaluation process. And I felt like we were going on that journey together. And it just opened a door to a whole new world. And the more you dug into it, the more credible it becomes to the point where there is just nothing else. You realize how non-credible everything else is. Bitcoin is the culmination of critical thinking. We live in a world where we take things for granted. It's like the world is the way it is because it is the way it is. There aren't solid foundations on which the financial system is built and which money is constructed. But we never question it because we are born inside the system. We live inside the system. And all we hear about money is what we're told by the system.
It's the David Foster Wallace fishes swimming along. You know that one?
Exactly. We're never educated.
What is water?
What is money?
What is money?
We never
exactly.
It's the biggest question of our time that no one even thinks about. We just use money every day. What we consider money, pieces of paper, digits on a screen every day. We don't really question what that means, where that comes from, how the system works, how everything around us is a derivative of the quality of the money.
So why did you become a filmmaker?
I didn't become a filmmaker. When I left Superbet 12 months ago, my focus is now entirely on Bitcoin and on trying to help educate people. And so I put together a presentation, and the presentation wasn't teaching people about Bitcoin. It wasn't explaining what Bitcoin is to people. My target was at the end of 30 minutes, I want people to want to learn about Bitcoin.
Okay.
Which is a much easier target because you can't teach someone about Bitcoin in 30 minutes in a comprehensive way because it's just such a big topic. And so I created a story. The title of the presentation was called What's the Problem? It didn't mention Bitcoin. Nobody in the room, apart from my friend, knew that it was about Bitcoin because it doesn't even mention Bitcoin until the last slide. But it's a story like Pixar animated AI pictures, of a group that get washed up on a desert island and are having to try and reconstruct society. And then you have the introduction of perfect money, and then there's a disagreement and there's a split on the island, a split between a perfect money, which has all the characteristics of Bitcoin, but we just don't mention Bitcoin, and perfect money that has a big red button attached to it, which allows you to change anything if you need to at any point in time. And then through the story, it allows us to introduce how free markets work, what happens in free markets when you have perfect money, and then what triggers the corruption of the money, and then the consequences that flow downstream of the corruption of the money, primarily from printing money, but also from changing the censorship-resistant nature of money. And by going through that, you end up on the bad side of the island. It's just today. It's exactly how our world is. It's exactly how our world is. I start the presentation by just listing lots of problems.
Yes.
And, it's inequality, it's homelessness, it's obesity, it's addiction, lots and lots and lots. And I say, all of these things seem like disparate issues. They seem like they're totally unconnected, and we experience them all around us today, but they're also getting worse. Very few people think we're traveling in the right direction here as a country, as a society, or further. But I say, look, all of these share a root cause, and it's just the quality of the money. It's the primary driver of all of these things. And then the story helps to go from perfect money that gets corrupted, that spirals out of control and delivers today. And then it's very clear to people looking at it, right? I never knew this. I never knew all these issues that we have today are just because the money is broken. Just because the money is broken. And you see the compare and contrast between not corrupting the money and corrupting the money through the story. And then it provides the audience, when I was presenting it, with this skeletal mental framework as to why Bitcoin is important. And so the ending is, okay, you've seen this story, you see what happens. Oh, and by the way, the perfect money is Bitcoin. You need to learn about Bitcoin. And then that's it. And so it's meant to be a jumping off point for anybody who wants to understand why we are in the situation we are in and what we can do to fix it. This is why it's fix the money, fix the world. If we fix the money, a lot of these problems disappear, or they certainly get massively reduced. But it's very hard for people to connect the dots. And they said, this is great. You should share it with other people. And I thought, oh, that's a good idea. I'll go and make a video and I'll post it on YouTube on a brand new account because maybe someone will watch it. And I repost it on X. No followers, no nothing. And now it's been viewed probably 1 million times across X and YouTube. And so I would encourage everybody to go and watch What's the Problem after this, because it is going to make a lot more sense. This will be a lot more context having watched it.
One of the very clever things about the film is that you relate the problem to a very wide range of societal issues, like the obesity problem, wealth inequality, loss of trust. You've got about a dozen or more societal issues here that really draw people in.
For the avoidance of doubt, the problem is that the state has access to a big red button, which allows it to print as much money as it wants, whenever it wants, in various forms. That's abstracted away from how the mechanics actually work. But in the story, there is just a big red button, and Fiatello, who runs one side of the island, can just press it whenever he wants and print some extra money for the government, which is effectively what happens. Now, when you print money, it has 3 core impacts. And the first is it distorts the price signals in the free market. I will talk about this as if it was in the story, because if I talk about it in the modern world, it's compounding on top of all the problems it's already created in the modern world, because we're not starting from a free market in any sense, because all the money is already corrupted. So printing extra just makes it worse. But in the story, both sides are a free market with perfect money. So the only reason any prices would change is if there's a change in demand or supply, which is fairly obvious. And this is when we work through, at no stage does anyone go, well, that's wrong. These are like small, short steps, which people can logically agree on. And then it's the compounding effect of those small steps that end up with these issues. And so you end up with corruption of the free market, then the price signals. That has an impact on the misallocation of capital. So when the government prints money, it goes into the pockets of the government. For those new Fiatellos, which is the currency they use, and not all fiat currencies are just Fiatellos, those extra Fiatellos are in the pocket of the government. For them to reach the rest of the economy, they have to leave the account of the government into businesses and people connected to the government. That's the only way. The government spends money into the economy. The Cantillon effect is people closest to the money printer get the money first. And have the advantages of receiving the money first. So the first impact is the distortion of the price signals. Now, when the extra Fiatellos come into the market in the areas connected closely to the government, they look like extra demand, but they're just extra money. They're just extra Fiatellos. And so that starts to increase prices in the areas connected to the government, which introduces a greater level of profitability initially for those sectors. So the prices go up, the cost of producing them hasn't gone up. It is now a signal to all the entrepreneurs in the market that there's money to be made by moving and deploying your human and real capital to these areas of the economy. But it wasn't extra demand, it was just extra Fiatellos. So these productive people are now getting pulled away from where they were previously focusing and are moving closer to the government to compete for something which is not real. So it undermines the health and the productivity of the economy. That's the first one. The second one is that as that works its way through the economy, business A spends money with business B, et cetera, it leads to an increase in the cost of raw inputs. So human cost or energies or raw inputs. So now eventually every business is faced with the need to change its prices to its customers because its input costs have gone up. Because any person running a business is taking risk. They are allocating their capital, their time to build a business, to take risk, to employ people, to produce a product or service, to then hopefully make a small profit margin to justify the rationale for them doing it. If your input costs go up, if you don't pass on that cost in some way to the user, your profit margin is eroded. And at some point, it becomes no longer a correct risk-reward decision for you to even run the business. You think, well, why am I taking this risk? I'll close the business. I'll go and work for someone else. And so assuming people didn't want to close the businesses, they'd have to find a way to pass that cost on to reestablish that profit margin. You can do that in one of three ways. You can either just say, well, my costs have gone up, so therefore my price is going up. Product's exactly the same size, same quality, it's just now more expensive. Or I can say, well, I don't want to put my price up for customers, so I'll keep the price the same, quality the same, I'll just shrink the product. It's now 10% smaller than it used to be. And this is shrinkflation. This is what we see. And we see both of those things in the shops today, combination of the two. Now, both of those impact the affordability of the population. The population is now worse off because they are paying more for the same amount, or they're paying the same amount and receiving less, which just means they have to buy more of it. If they needed 100 grams, they still need 100 grams, not 90. Let's just go and buy another packet. And so that eats away at the affordability of the population. But the third option that businesses have is, instead of compromising on the price or the size, they compromise on something else. And it's the quality of the product. Now, that quality of the product could be through humans, people involved in the processes, or customer support, or all of these things. So the easiest way is just to fire people. But again, that leads to increased level of unaffordability for the population. It creates unemployment, and now the government has to step in and deal with these recently unemployed people and try and support them. But there's a more insidious one, which is to say, well, I'll just reduce the quality. So the product's still the same size, the same price. I've just found a way to make my inputs cheaper. And I move to lower quality inputs. And so what Fiatello starts to see on his islands is that the fresh produce that used to go into the food is increasingly replaced with levels of industrialized sludge, because it's the economical rationale of insulating the price impact for the customer because your input costs are going up because Fiatello's been hitting the big red button and printing extra money. And so as the quality of the food offered starts to decline, the obesity rate starts to rise. Other secondary health issues start to arise because we're forced to consume things that we're not meant to consume, right? But it's driven from the corruption of the money, right? So that deals with your obesity. But It creates a health crisis, put more pressure on the government then, because the government has now got more unemployed people and more unhealthy people, and it's got to figure out a way to support these people. So the first two. The third direct impact. So you had distortion of the price signals, you had the business input cost increase, and the third is asset inflation. So as Fiatello is pressing the button and printing more money, he's introducing overnight more Fiatellos into the system when the amount of assets or hard assets in the system remains largely unchanged from one day to the next. So if you thought about the fair value of any of those assets when measured in Fiatellos, they go up because there's just more Fiatellos in the system. And so he starts to see house prices going up. He starts to see the stock market going up, speculative assets going up. This is not because they are any more productive than they were yesterday. They're just measured in something which is now more plentiful. If you doubled the amount of Fiatellos in the system overnight, you'd expect all the asset prices to double.
They've got to be saved or invested somewhere.
Yeah. Why would I sell to you something measured in Fiatellos when the amount of Fiatellos is just doubled? Why would I sell it for what I would have sold it to you yesterday? I wouldn't. I'd double the price. I mean, this is like basic stuff. And then you get an additional effect here in that because the assets start going up, but because people's frames of reference are anchored, they often don't know the Fiatellos are being printed, or they don't understand the extent to which the Fiatellos are being printed. So they see the asset prices going up, and they don't see it as debasement of Fiatellos. They see it as a way to make money, a way to make extra Fiatellos. So they have the stock market's going up because it's great, we're really productive. You know, we should be increasing our level of speculation. I should be buying the stock market. I should be taking out bigger loans to buy more property because the house prices never go down. They only go up because he just prints more Fiatellos. But you're just taking a bet on the debasement there. But when the asset prices are going up and people start to speculate, the banking sector starts introducing more and more leverage, A, because it's profitable, people encouraged to speculate. But also people have to take out leverage to buy the assets because the assets have gone up. And they take out the leverage because they're stuck on wages that are not increasing at the same rate as the money printing. So for somebody who wants to buy a house, they see their house price increasing and running away from them in terms of affordability versus their salary or their wage. So then buy a house, you've got to take out leverage. You've got to take out debt to buy a house.
It forces people to be risky, and it forces people to take risks they otherwise wouldn't. And one of the addictions that must instill is the addiction to gambling and the tendency to financial nihilism, where people who don't have assets can't see the hope of ever owning assets. So why not do the lottery?
But it's basically exactly right. It affects everybody. If you're trying to buy a house, if you're a family, when we were both younger, you could buy a house. You could buy a house on one salary.
Absolutely.
And you could have children.
Yeah.
Whereas you can't now. You can't afford a house on one salary. You need two people working, so you have less time together, you have fewer children, you can't afford to have children.
Yeah, we're in a more productive economy.
Productive economy. Oh, absolutely not.
When I first had a mortgage and kids, brought up 3 kids, essentially on one income household, we didn't have email, we didn't have mobile phones, didn't have social media, didn't have the amazing technological tools of productivity that everyone has today. It's a real dilemma.
It is a paradox, but it's the lack of benefit we've seen is because of the money printer.
Yes. One is deflationary and the other is inflationary.
Yeah, technological innovation is naturally deflationary. Price action for all goods and services is naturally deflationary. This is 180 degrees from what we experience and what people think is normal. You can satisfy yourself within 30 seconds that is obviously true. Obviously true. Over time, if you get better at processes and you unlock technical innovations, which make processes more efficient, and you have competition with other people who are trying to do similar, the natural impact is that prices fall. Yes. Things become cheaper to produce and competition erodes profit margins. That's it. So naturally, over time, if you're advancing technologically, prices should be going down. That's it. But we don't see that. Why don't we see that?
I would argue over the last 20, 25 years, the 2 main deflationary factors in the world have been technology and the adoption of 1.4 billion Chinese people into the world economy, which has flooded the world with cheap goods. I would say those are the 2 big deflationary trends of my adult life.
And what's happened to prices over that?
Yes, yeah. Well, the level of inflation for the last 15 years has been less than I think most people feared it would be if you measured it in the conventional sense.
Is it the inflation number you're told by the central bank, which is nonsense? Or is it the actual debasement of the money and the inflation rate that we see around ourselves when we go to the shops and in the things we experience? The central bank gets to decide what the inflation rate is because it controls the methodology and has given itself the flexibility to remove things that go up in price. If you're creating your own benchmark against which you are judged, you make that benchmark as easy as possible to outperform by changing the rules and then tell the world, yeah, that's the real inflation rate, when we know it's not 2%, we know it's not 3%, we know it's 10%. You go to the shop, the prices are going up, the products are shrinking, everything is becoming more expensive. The compounding rate of debasement is around 10% a year of our money. And we know this. Like, everybody listening knows this. If I gave you some money now and said, you got right, look after this for 10 years, you wouldn't put it in the bank. You wouldn't put it back because you know in 10 years' time, it's going to be worth a lot less, even with interest. Your purchasing power is getting destroyed. Like, we all intuitively know this. But then the central bank says, oh, no, it's only 2%. Well, it's not. It's not, because experience and the real world tells me it's not. And I can see that the rate at which the money supply is expanding is around 10% a year. So that's the real inflation rate here. And we know this because we wouldn't keep the money in the bank. So we've made that connection. We just haven't articulated why we've made that connection.
So we know what the problem is. Why is Bitcoin the solution?
I can show you the door, but you have to be motivated to do a small amount of work to walk through it. But I guarantee when you've done that small amount of work, you're going to want to do a lot more work, because when you go in, you don't come out again, and you just see the world totally differently. And eventually everybody's going to walk through that door. And this is why I say it is inevitable. The march of Bitcoin is inevitable because it rewires your brain to see the world in a more critical way, to step out of the fishbowl and actually think from first principles, does any of this actually make any sense? And the answer is no.
A dyed-in-the-wool conservative might say, absolutely agree with you, Joe, but we used to have a world like this and it was called the gold standard.
Totally different. The core problem here is the existence of a big red button. I think the statement everyone can agree with: nobody should be allowed to print for free what you have to work for.
Yeah.
Basic statement. Everyone in the world should agree with that statement. So nobody should have access to a big red button to steal from you whenever they want, because they're stealing your purchasing power by pressing it.
And why can no other bearer asset play that role? I suppose that's the question I'm asking.
Okay, so the only contender there is gold. And on the gold standard was, again, just a promise. And that promise was broken. We don't go around today using gold coins. Even if we went back to gold standard, we would not be using gold coins for very obvious reasons. Bulky, you'd be physically carrying this thing. What if you wanted to pay for a penny sweet in gold? How would you do that? Like, it's microscopic. It just doesn't work.
Okay.
It doesn't work. And so what has happened over time is that the gold gets centralized and paper money is issued in receipt of gold, because it's much easier to carry a paper note in your pocket. But you've already then broken the link between the money and the currency. Because the gold is centralized, the gold becomes more and more centralized. There's a formation of a central bank, and other banks move their gold to the central bank. People don't come in and ask for the gold because it's bulky. Why would you? And so they end up all the gold in the vault.
Much easier just to assume it's there.
Yeah, but if no one ever comes and asks for the gold, and you have the ability to create paper money, you just print more paper money.
Yes.
Because no one ever asked for the gold. And this is what happens. This is what the US did in the 60s. And then they were rumbled in 1971 when the French knocked on the door and said, how are you affording all these wars? We don't think you've got the same amount of gold in your vaults as the amount of paper you've got.
Can you send us our gold back?
Can we have our gold back?
Have you seen that website, WTF 1971?
Brilliant website. Anybody who's interested in this, go to that website.
Yeah.
You know, when the US took them off the gold standard in 71, it refused to honor the paper with the gold.
Yes.
And so he's just reintroduced the big red button again. So even on a gold standard, it's a promise not to press a big red button, but you can still break the promise whenever you want. So it doesn't work. You need a money which is a currency. And Bitcoin fixes all of those things. It's absolutely scarce. there will only ever be 21 million. There's still about 5% still to be produced, but you produce them via energy usage. And we can talk about that because that's a positive, not a negative, because some people at home might be thinking, oh, Bitcoin's destroying the planet, something like that. Bitcoin is the solution to the energy crisis, not the cause of the energy crisis.
Yes.
It should be embraced by everybody on all sides of the spectrum, for different political spectrum, for different reasons, but we can come back to that. It's totally fungible. There's no concept of, is that really zinc or is it gold? Everything is the same. It moves at the speed of light. You don't need anybody to hold it for you. You don't need a third party in any transaction. I can send it to you. You can send it to me at the speed of light. It's effectively infinitely divisible. And it's digital. It goes over the internet. And you can hold it yourself. Bitcoin is perfect money. It takes time for people to make the connections and be open to thinking about it in a neutral way to begin with, and not just take what the media say and what the people who control the big red button, who control the media or influence the media, would say. Because if you asked everyone to write down, what's Bitcoin, or is Bitcoin good or bad, most people still now would write Bitcoin is bad. Bitcoin is bad because I've been told by the media X, Y, and Z. Those things are not true.
How do you feel about what's going on in the US with the sort of adoption of a Bitcoin as a reserve asset? If you believe in the separation of money and state, should one be a bit nervous about the developments here?
So the context here is the US a month ago established this National Strategic Bitcoin Reserve, effectively putting it on a par with gold in the US. And this should be the clearest signal to everybody globally that the monetary order is about to change and everyone just needs to wake up. I shake my head in disbelief at the rest of the world not putting two and two together here. But just because the US owns Bitcoin doesn't give them any control over Bitcoin. And this is the key difference. Bitcoin is a voluntary participation network. Just by owning Bitcoin does not grant you any rights to do anything. You're just a participant.
Yeah.
You don't get to change the rules. You can't influence anything. And the natural outcome is that everyone in the world owns Bitcoin. And that's individuals, companies, and countries. The US administration now has a lot of Bitcoiners in there who have put two and two together and have realized everybody in the world is going to own Bitcoin. So we need to own as much of it as possible, as quickly as possible. And that doesn't give them any control over the network. They're never going to own more than a few percent because they have to buy it from other people. And the people who own Bitcoin increasingly understand why they own it. I'm never selling my Bitcoin because there'll be a day where I don't have to. That may seem super strange for people listening, but I would give you an equivalent example. So if you went to Lebanon now, and I don't even know what currency they're using, they change it all the time. Let's call it the Lebanese lira.
It used to be the Lebanese pound. I don't know whether it's
Yeah, I think that died as well. I don't know.
Yeah.
But people, they're forced to use this. They get paid in Lebanese pounds. They then, as quickly as possible, get rid of the Lebanese pounds.
Of course.
Into dollars. So it's like saying to somebody, and then obviously the Lebanese pounds get destroyed because they just print more and more and there's no backing for the currency at all. So the dollars, even though they're similarly going to zero in purchasing power, they're just going much more slowly. So it's deemed a good store of value for them relative to the Lebanese pounds. But it's like turning around to somebody who's sold their Lebanese pounds into dollars and saying to them, when are you going to take some profits on those dollars and turn them back into the Lebanese pounds?
Never.
Like, never. The West is just that in slow motion.
It's in slow motion, yeah.
It's being debased to 10% a year, not 50% a year. It's the only difference.
So if there's one subject in TradFi investment world that's more controversial than Bitcoin, it's strategy, what used to be called MicroStrategy, and Michael Saylor. Mm-hmm. I just wondered whether Michael Saylor might make a good next chairman of the Federal Reserve.
Oh, no Bitcoiner would want to be, well, maybe.
That would be a signal for you, wouldn't it?
Well, the only reason a Bitcoiner, I think, would want to become chairman of the Federal Reserve is to shut it down.
Yes. Yeah, would it be him or Ron Paul, maybe? Yeah.
It shouldn't exist. The Federal Reserve is neither federal nor has reserves. It's a privately owned corporation, distorting the price of money and the issuance of money, and is destroying the entire world, just slowly. And so, yeah, it is the cancer at the heart of the entire financial system, is the Fed. And I cannot see Michael Saylor in a million years wanting to go and do that job. But the only solution is to shut it down. The solution here is to remove the big red button. They cannot be allowed to have one.
Yes.
So, yeah, put any of us in charge, we just put a big red X through the entire thing. That's the solution. The world would be a much better place if we did that. But politically, that's never going to happen. Never going to happen until the US has worked its way out of insolvency. And the only way they can work themselves out of insolvency is by embracing Bitcoin, in the same way that Michael Saylor is embracing Bitcoin. So for context for your listeners who may not know who Michael Saylor is, Michael Saylor, I believe now is the chairman of Strategy that was previously MicroStrategy. They are the biggest corporate holder in the world of Bitcoin, own around 2.5% of all the Bitcoin that will ever exist. That is 2.5 times the ownership of the US itself. And he has taken a B2B software business that's been running for 25 years, making, I don't know, something 50 to 100 million of EBITDA a year, which was valued at 1 to 2 billion in 2020 to a market cap of probably 80 billion today by embracing Bitcoin. He issues shares, raises debt, raises preferred debt to buy Bitcoin on the balance sheet, and does this incessantly. And he's weaponizing the financial system to make Strategy the most valuable company in the world. Is a likely outcome, because they are already, in my view, unsurpassable in the amount of Bitcoin that they own relative to the amount anybody else could possibly buy without drastically changing the price, of which they already own 2.5%. So the price drastically changed, it would make them meaningfully more valuable. And so, yeah, he's really taken up pole position here globally. And now we have, I think it's close to 100 public companies around the world are starting to follow suit to different degrees and have Bitcoin on their balance sheet. And the US embracing the strategic Bitcoin reserve is doing the same pattern, really, just not as aggressively, because Saylor uses debt as well to buy Bitcoin, whereas the US has Bitcoin on its balance sheet because it has confiscated it, or it's been forfeited. You can't confiscate Bitcoin. Nobody can take your Bitcoin unless you give it to them. People have forfeited it in the past when it was worth a lot less, as part of plea deals and legal processes.
Well, we know it's only used by criminals and money launderers, so it's surprising.
I mean, you couldn't make it up. I mean, well, you could. I mean, if you were a criminal, you wouldn't want to use Bitcoin.
You'd use cash.
Yeah, you use briefcases full of dollars.
Yes.
And you use the fiat banking system. Just look at all the
HSBC, maybe. I don't know.
Well, I wouldn't want to name any individually, but just tot up the amount of fines that have been paid for money laundering within the existing financial system. You wouldn't want to use Bitcoin because you can trace all the transaction histories. Every transaction you ever make is pseudonymous, but you can go back to the very first transaction that was ever made. Everybody sees everything. You just don't know who it was. And so if you're a criminal, you absolutely wouldn't want to use that. For the privacy perspective, often Bitcoin is used. Another aspect of Bitcoin is helpful in that you don't require the permission of a third party. If you're trying to transfer illicit funds from one bank to another bank, you need the banks to agree to do it, which makes it harder for you to execute it. You want a digital bearer asset that you can send to anywhere, to anybody without anyone else's permission. That is great. But from a criminality perspective, as soon as somebody figures out which wallet is yours, they can see everything you've ever done. So it doesn't make sense for that to be only used by criminals. It's somewhere on the spectrum of deliberate misinformation to just simple misunderstanding on a lot of these topics. And it's not necessary to say that it is deliberate. It's just a complex topic as well. But I think over time, the media is becoming more educated on these things because individuals are becoming more educated on these things. And when anybody studies Bitcoin for any even small period of time, they begin to realize it is just a massive change for the better for every aspect of society. And so I've yet to meet anybody who has become a Bitcoiner and then not become a Bitcoiner. It's a one-way door.
We're moving into a world that is fragmenting, fracturing, from an economic and from a monetary perspective. We've got the US administration making warm noises about Bitcoin and seemingly starting to think about how they can use this as an asset to help them with their insolvency. The rest of the world seems to be a long way detached from that. And you look at the way that someone like Christine Lagarde talks about the institution of central bank digital currencies. And it's a whole different mindset, worldview, isn't it?
Well, this is where we are with the world. Central bank digital currencies is tyranny in a box. Whenever you hear central bank digital currency, it is tyranny in a box. it takes the abuses that we currently experience in the financial system through someone having access to the big red button and put them on steroids. Every single transaction you will do will be monitored. They can change what the function of the money itself is. The introduction of a central bank digital currency will be wrapped in a warm, fuzzy, we're going to make transactions easier.
Yes.
Ribbon. The reality is they can make the money programmable. And so if I say something somebody doesn't like, or I do something, or I vote the wrong way or something, they can delete the money. They can make it so that...
They can timestamp it and say you've got to spend it by the end of the year. Or
yeah, they can put expiry dates on the money.
Yeah.
They can mandate this money cannot be spent on X, Y, and Z. Right, so if you think we live in a...
Or they can watch what you do spend your money on and then socially score you at the end of the month and say, well, sorry, your credit rating, your monetary rating has declined this week, Mr. Bryan. You're only going to get X amount.
Yeah, you've already had your one flight for the year.
Yes.
Spent too much on red meat, and they're not aligned with what the government says is the truth right now. This is the world that central bank digital currencies bring. Bitcoin is the escape. I mean, Christine Lagarde, we think the UK is bad. I mean, I'm glad I'm not subjected to that, because they're going to push this through against the will of the population. And she's already talked about October 2025 is when they're going to start building this thing. It's going to take 2 or 3 years. I mean, I take heart from the comfort that governments are terrible at doing anything, because you just leave it to the free market. So I doubt they'll get it done in 2 or 3 years. But we'll see. The time is running out for people to be able to exit the system. And you wouldn't need to exit the system unless the system was broken. The system's broken because they've got a big red button and they will just destroy all of your purchasing power and steal all your assets gradually, because, we're all in it together. And so I would encourage them to start at least just reading about Bitcoin. First of all, watch the film, then read about Bitcoin. Make up your own mind. Because, Jeremy, people often say, Bitcoin's like a cult. But it's the only cult in the world where you're told, don't trust anybody else. Think for yourself and make your own decisions. Yeah, I guess it's that sort of cult. And it's
free critical thinking.
Critical thinkers welcome.
Yeah. Given that Michael Saylor did what he did with MicroStrategy, now Strategy, nearly 5 years ago now, are you surprised that not more companies and organizations haven't followed that path? I know you said that quite a few are.
It depends how you look at it. And from one perspective, it's terrible. The other perspective, it's amazing. The perspective it's amazing is you've gone from Michael Saylor adopting the Bitcoin strategy for the company now called Strategy in 2020. And now we have the US administration setting up a strategic Bitcoin reserve.
And we've had ETFs along the way. But
to think that leap has been made in 5 years, you've got straight to the top of the pyramid.
Absolutely, yeah.
Right? Is amazing. But that's happened because the administration has lots of Bitcoiners in it. Bitcoin voting played a material role in helping secure a majority. And the US is the home of freedom, innovation, the free market. And so you would expect them to be leading the way here, because this is such a no-brainer. It's such a no-brainer.
The irony is it's in an environment where they've got the cleanest dirty shirt in the pile in terms of the dollar, but they've also got the keenest sense of what Bitcoin can do to solve their problem, which is kind of interesting.
Yeah, Bitcoin is the only way out for them. Given the US is at the center of the financial system, it mandates the dollar through the exertion of the US military force around the world. Then they also have the ability to change the rules whenever they want. So if you're already the biggest national holder of Bitcoin, you have the biggest corporate holder in the entire world being a US company, and you get to make the rules and you understand what Bitcoin is, it's fairly clear what you're ultimately going to do. So from a US perspective, very good. From a European, UK perspective, terrible. Absolutely terrible. We're still going in the wrong direction. We're going towards authoritarianism via the back door. Still, it's about greater and greater levels of government involvement in every aspect of society. And like you say, it's government causes problem. Government's here to fix it, which causes a problem, which government's here to fix it. And it comes down to the big red button and the EU moving very explicitly now in the direction of a CBDC cements their position.
Do you think the UK will avoid that?
Yeah.
Yeah, it sounds like it.
I think the timing has worked out reasonably well for the UK. We're still going in the opposite direction to the US in terms of given the timings of the elections. I suspect what will happen is the UK will decide to move in the direction of the US as opposed to the tyranny of Europe with the introduction of the CBDC. You have a choice here between freedom and tyranny, and it's freedom with Bitcoin or it's tyranny with central bank digital currencies and the cementing of the big red button into the heart of everything forever. That's the choice we all face. Okay, and the UK is in the middle. The US has gone one way, Europe's going the other. The UK is in the middle, and I suspect when push comes to shove, we'll go with the US. We'll probably prevaricate for a meaningful period of time. But the regulations and the support that you get in the UK and the EU when you're trying to build on Bitcoin or be associated with Bitcoin in any way is still just terrible because they don't understand it, and it is a threat to the centralized power unless you embrace it, because there's no neutral strategy here. If you fight Bitcoin, you'll lose. If you embrace Bitcoin, you're going to win. If you sit there and ignore it, you're losing. If you don't embrace it, you are losing. And this is the game theory. This is why I say it's inevitable, Jeremy, because Bitcoin's a competitive advantage for everybody who adopts it. On such a long list of things, the logical thing is just to adopt it and then outperform. And that goes for individuals, companies, and countries. If you don't engage with it, you get left behind. There's no neutral strategy. And therefore, game theory will play out and everyone will own Bitcoin. And those that resist and don't will drastically underperform.
So on a geopolitical level, you've got China that has several times tried to outlaw it or make certainly the mining of Bitcoin very difficult. And it's buying gold like it's going out of fashion, both at a central bank level. Now, their financial institutions are buying gold. We know their population has been, well, they'll buy anything to get out of the renminbi. But the Bitcoin game theory of geopolitics has the US hands down winner from a monetary perspective.
Yeah. I mean, China, it's impossible to know how much Bitcoin they have, but it's on a par with the US. It's a similar sort of level.
I think Russia has quite a lot of Bitcoin as well, I gather.
Well, the US, they forced everyone away from the dollar. And so if you spend 50 years encouraging softly or more explicitly with a big stick the rest of the world to hold US treasuries
yes,
as their store of value because you're at the center of the financial system. And then when a country does something you don't like, you freeze all the assets of the country.
Well, you confiscate them.
And specifically the Russians in Ukraine. I mean, there's obviously the massive doubt around the continued purchasing power of those bills. But if you think I'm a country and I'm storing a large chunk of my value in something that the US can just decide doesn't exist anymore, that's not a good place to be. Because then you're constantly questioning, right, well, I can't do this, I can't say this because the US might confiscate the treasuries and then they've just removed all my value. So what do? You then go down that chain of thinking that ends with Bitcoin. It's like, I need something that moves at the speed of light, nobody can stop, that can transact billions of value at no cost, and no one can print any more of. I've got to either own gold or Bitcoin. And they're all going to end up with Bitcoin because you can't transport the gold. You can't transport the gold. You can't use it for commerce. Bitcoin is money, it's currency, it's everything. Bitcoin unlocks the global free market because you can't stop me sending money anywhere anymore. I can buy something from someone in Angola in a second. So as you were saying before around, we're seeing this fragmentation of globalization. That's true on a nation state basis with the barriers and the frictions and all of these things. Yeah. Bitcoin doesn't care.
It's underneath. It's what Dominic Frisby said, that libertarianism is the politics of the internet and Bitcoin is the money of the internet. And the internet is the driver of the sovereign individual. And you can go to Buenos Aires, which I have done. I'm sure, Lynn Alden talks about, you can go to Egypt, you can go to Turkey, you can go to Nigeria, and you will find people who regard themselves as sovereign individuals. They're digital nomads. They understand it inherently. So, yeah, I share that view. I really admire your passion and your view that it is inevitable and your maximalist approach. For all my philosophical leanings, I chastise myself that I still view it as an insurance policy for my existence in the normie world. But I think what you've done, Joe, is fantastic. The film is a great primer for anyone who has this feeling about there being a multivariable problem in the world, but can't put a finger on it. And I think you've done a great job doing that. And I would encourage anyone who's listening to this to view the YouTube film or to listen to it, to go to your website, because it takes them to the door of what you've brilliantly described as being inevitable. And it's very hard to argue against it. So thank you. How do people follow what you're up to, and what do you want to do with the website and the film? Is there another stage? Do you have another film in you? What's next?
No, this is a one-time thing, but the fact that it's been viewed 1 million times, or more than 1 million times, is just amazing. But it's because I think it resonates so well with
it's
people.
Translated into how many different languages?
40 languages now.
40, okay.
Yeah. And so you can send it to pretty much most people in the world, and they'll be able to find their native subtitles. Or on the YouTube channel, we've now released a bunch of extra videos, which is the original video in French. So speaking French with French slides, or German.
Okay.
Polish, Spanish, Slovak, then there's another 4 or 5 on the way as well. So we're trying to make this accessible to as many people as possible around the world. I just want people to connect the dots. And once you see the problem, you can't unsee it again. And then it's on you whether you actually want to do something about it, to protect yourself and to protect your family. But not just protect yourself and your family. Turn it into a competitive advantage, because most of the world is still asleep. The outcome is known. As we've talked about, Bitcoin's going to consume the world, and just most people just don't realize it. And so, I would encourage you, if you're listening and you've got children or teenagers or people just beginning their journey into work life, tell them to read about Bitcoin. The impact of Bitcoin on the world, I'd go so far to say, is it's going to be more impactful than the internet. And if somebody had said to you 25 years ago about where the internet's going to be in 25 years' time, you'd be like, I really need to learn about that. And so I would just encourage people, watch the film. It's called What's the Problem? You can just Google what's the problem now, and it starts to appear. It's amazing. It's, there's such a generic term. What's the problem, Bitcoin, or Joe Bryan? The website is Sats versus Fiat, SATS vs FIAT. So Satoshi's versus Fiatello's, Sats versus Fiat.com. And you can find me on X. That handle cuts across the website, YouTube, and X, but also you can contact me directly on LinkedIn. I'm on there, or on X at Satmojo, SATMO, Joe, JOE. And so, I just hope people have found it helpful. And if you have, watched the video, then please share it with the people you care about, because we make a change if we just educate each other.
Joe, thanks very much. Really enjoyed it.
Likewise. Thanks, Jeremy.
Brought to you by Progressive Equity.